My son demanded I pay off his wife's $300,000 debt as if I were some sort of endless ATM. "Don't disappoint me, Mom," Daniel said. His voice cold, eyes glued to his phone. 6 hours later, my bank account was empty. When they returned that evening for the cash, they found my house deserted, my suitcase gone, and only one envelope on the kitchen table. What was inside turned their faces white as ghosts. Before we continue, make sure to follow and support this channel. You won't believe what happened next. The doorbell rang at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, 3 sharp, impatient rings that cut through the silence of my house like a knife. I already knew who it was before I even reached the door. My son Daniel never showed up unannounced unless he needed something. I left my half-finished cup of tea on the counter and walked slowly down the hallway. Through the front windows, I could see his car, a shiny black SUV, parked crookedly in the driveway. Typical Daniel, always in a hurry, always careless with everything, including people. When I opened the door, he was already on his phone, thumb flying across the screen. In his other hand, a brown envelope. He gave me a quick air kiss, not even touching my cheek, and brushed past me into the kitchen like he still lived here. "Morning, Mom. We need to talk," he said, pulling out a chair and sitting down my chair, the one by the window where I usually read the paper. "Coffee would be great," he added without looking up. I made it automatically. 10 years a widow, and I still served the men in my life as if it were my duty. When I placed the mug in front of him, I couldn't help noticing how tense his hands looked, how white his knuckles were as he scrolled. "Is Sophie okay? And the kids?" I asked gently. I hadn't seen my grandchildren in months. "They're fine," Daniel muttered, finally putting his phone away. He took a sip of coffee and sighed. "I'll get right to the point, Mom. Sophie got herself into a bit of a situation." A familiar chill ran down my spine. "What kind of situation?" He pushed the envelope toward me. "She made some investments. They didn't pan out." I opened it carefully. Inside were pages of bank statements, loan notices, and a contract with a number circled in red. $300,000. My breath caught. "Daniel," I whispered. "That's almost everything I have." He leaned back in his chair, completely calm. "Mom, you live alone. The house is paid off. You've got your pension, your savings. You're 68. What are you saving for?" His tone was light, almost reasonable, but the words cut deep. "This house is my security," I said softly. "And I still have medical bills, doctor visits." He interrupted, tapping the table. "Mom, please. Sophie just trusted the wrong person. If we don't pay this off today, things could get ugly." I frowned. "Ugly how?" "They're not bankers, Mom," he said flatly. "They're dangerous people." A tremor of fear went through me. "What have you gotten involved in, Daniel?" "You don't need to know," he snapped. "Just trust me. I'll pay you back once the business stabilizes. I just need you to transfer the money now, before it's too late." He sounded so much like his father in that moment, Edward, my late husband. Smooth, commanding, leaving no room for my opinion. I stared at the envelope, then at my son's face, the boy who once brought me wildflowers and called me his hero. Now he was a stranger in my kitchen, demanding my life savings. "You've borrowed money from me before," I said quietly. "I never saw any of it again." His face hardened. "This is different. This is life or death, Mom. I'm your only son, your family. You always said you'd do anything for me." That line, "you'd do anything for me," it used to be my weakness. The same one Edward used to keep me small and obedient for 30 years. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly. "I need to think about it," I whispered. "There's no time to think." Daniel's voice rose. "I need that money in my account before the end of the day. Tomorrow will be too late." And he stood up, pacing like a trapped animal. Then he stopped behind my chair, placing his hands on my shoulders. His grip was firm, heavy, almost possessive. "Mom," he said, softer now. You know I wouldn't ask if it weren't serious. It's for Sophie's safety. For the family. Family. That word again. The word that always chained me. I closed my eyes and nodded weakly. Okay, I said at last. I'll transfer it. Relief washed over his face. For the first time that morning, he smiled that same charming smile that used to melt my heart when he was a boy. Thanks, Mom. I knew I could count on you. He kissed my forehead, grabbed his phone, and headed toward the door. I've got a meeting, but I'll be back for dinner, okay? We'll sort everything out then. He paused at the door and looked back. Don't disappoint me, Mom. And then he was gone. The house fell silent, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. His half-empty cup of coffee sat in front of me, a dark, bitter reminder of what had just happened. I stared at it for a long time. Then something in me began to shift, slowly, but unmistakably. A voice inside me whispered words I had never dared to think before. Enough. Through the window, I watched Daniel's car speed down the road, throwing gravel behind it. That's when the idea first formed in my mind, an idea the old Margaret would never have considered. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Marissa, I said when she answered. It's Margaret. I need your help. Marissa arrived half an hour later. We'd been friends since college before I dropped out to marry Edward. She'd always been the strong one, the practical one. A lawyer, independent, everything I wasn't. When I told her what Daniel had done, she nearly dropped her tea. $300,000. Margaret, that's insane. It's not the first time, I admitted, my voice breaking. Last year, it was 100,000. Before that, 50. He always promises to repay me, but he never does. Marissa slammed her cup down. And why do you keep giving in? You're one of the smartest women I know. How can you not see what he's doing? I didn't have an answer, just a whisper. He's my son. And you're his mother, not his bank, she snapped. Edward manipulated you for decades, and now Daniel is doing the same thing. When does it stop, Margaret? I looked out the window at my garden. The roses were blooming again after years of failing in bad soil. They had survived neglect, storms, and cold, just like me. Today, I said suddenly. It stops today. Marissa stared at me, then smiled. Finally, we spent the next hour planning quietly. She would help me open a new account, one Daniel didn't know existed, and transfer my funds there. Then I would pack my bags and leave before he came back for dinner. It sounded outrageous, impossible. But as I listened to my own voice explaining the plan, I realized how calm I felt. Fearful, yes, but also free. When I opened my closet later that afternoon, I stared at my clothes, my memories, my life neatly folded on those shelves. I didn't want to take much, just essentials, my medication, important papers, and a few keepsakes that still meant something to me. At the bottom of the dresser, I found a small wooden box, my secret stash. Just a few $1,000s I had saved over the years from selling baked goods and handmade scarves. My tiny rebellion. I slipped it into my bag and took one last look at the house that had been both a home and a cage. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. By the time the sun began to set, I was ready, and for the first time in my life, I was the one about to disappear. At the bank, the manager looked puzzled when I told him I wanted to transfer every cent from my account. Mrs. Evans, he said cautiously, that's a considerable amount. Are you sure you want to move all of it? Yes, I said firmly, surprising even myself. And I don't want any statements mailed to my address. Everything must stay digital. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded and began the paperwork. As I signed each page, I could almost feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. Each signature was a small act of rebellion, a quiet declaration of freedom. When we walked out of the bank, the Florida sun hit my face. It felt warmer than usual, almost forgiving. Marissa slipped her sunglasses on and gave me a look of approval. "Well," she said, "you just took the first real step of your new life." I laughed softly, though my voice trembled. "It feels terrifying." "It's supposed to," she said. "Freedom always feels like fear at first." We stopped by her law office next. She arranged everything quickly: power of attorney, legal protections, documents that would make it nearly impossible for Daniel to reverse what I'd done. Watching her work reminded me of who she was back in college. Confident, sharp, never apologizing for her strength. At one point, she looked up from her laptop and smiled gently. "You know, Margaret, I've waited decades to see this version of you." I smiled back, though tears welled in my eyes. Better late than never. When the documents were signed and sealed, Marissa grabbed her car keys. "Now," she said, "let's get you out of that house." Back home, the afternoon light was fading, painting the kitchen golden. The same kitchen where Daniel had sat that morning, cold and demanding, now felt like a ghost of itself. I opened the drawer and pulled out a piece of stationery. My hand trembled as I began to write. "Daniel, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. You said not to disappoint you, but I think you'll find that I finally have. I'm disappointed too. Disappointed in how easily I allowed myself to be used, to be diminished, to be afraid. This money you wanted isn't yours. It's what's left of my life, and I'm taking it with me. Don't look for me. Don't call. Maybe one day you'll understand that love isn't about control or obligation. It's about respect. And that's something I've finally learned to give myself." "Mom," I folded the note carefully and slid it into a white envelope. On the front, I wrote his name in large, steady letters. Daniel. Marissa stood quietly behind me. "You ready?" I looked around one last time, the photos on the walls, the clock ticking softly, the faint smell of roses from the garden outside. "I'm ready." We packed quickly, just one suitcase and a few essentials. Marissa had already booked a flight to Miami for later that afternoon, where she owned a small beach apartment. I left my wedding ring on the nightstand next to Edward's framed photograph. His cold, smiling eyes seemed to watch me as I turned off the light. By the time we drove away, the sun was sinking behind the trees. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. The highway stretched out in front of us, endless and open. For years, I'd dreamed of escaping, of driving without knowing where I was headed. Now it was happening. As the city disappeared behind us, Marissa glanced at me. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly. "I don't know yet, but I feel alive." She smiled. "That's a start." At the airport, everything moved in a blur: check-in, security, the rush of people around us. I kept expecting Daniel to appear, to grab my arm and demand explanations. But he didn't. We boarded the plane just as the sky turned orange and purple. As it lifted off the runway, I looked down through the window and whispered a silent goodbye to the life I'd left behind. Marissa squeezed my hand gently. "You just did something most people never find the courage to do." I didn't answer. I just watched the clouds drift by, feeling the tears slide silently down my cheeks. Marissa's apartment in Miami was small but beautiful, a cozy space overlooking the ocean, filled with warm light and the scent of sea salt. That first night, I sat on the balcony, a blanket around my shoulders, listening to the waves crash against the shore. It was the first time in years I could breathe freely. When I finally turned on my phone, I saw 17 missed calls, all from Daniel. I turned it off again. I wasn't ready to hear his voice. "He'll find you eventually," Marissa said, handing me a glass of wine. "But by then you'll be ready." "Maybe," I murmured. "For now, I just want peace." The following days passed in a strange calm. I slept more than I had in months. I woke up early to watch the sunrise over the water. Marissa went back to work, but she called me several times a day to check in. Still, My thoughts often drifted back to Daniel, wondering what he'd done when he found the letter. I could almost picture it. The disbelief, the anger, the shock of realizing he'd finally lost control. One afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, it was Marissa. "You're not going to believe what just happened," she said, her tone half amused, half exasperated. "Daniel showed up at my office, demanding to know where you were. He was furious, threatened to sue me." My stomach tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you're of sound mind, and that if he didn't leave immediately, I'd file for a restraining order." I could hear her smile through the phone. He turned red as a beet. I don't think anyone's ever stood up to him before. Despite everything, I found myself laughing. "You've always been my guardian angel." "Not an angel," she said softly. "Just a friend who refuses to let you keep sacrificing yourself." By the end of the week, I started to build small routines. I found a local market that sold fresh fruit and flowers. I baked again, something I hadn't done since Edward's death. The simple smell of bread and sugar filled the apartment, reminding me of a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. At 68, I was learning how to live for the first time. But the peace didn't last long. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at Marissa's office, addressed to me. Inside was a letter from Daniel's lawyer, demanding my return to ensure her safety and mental well-being. It also threatened to have me declared incompetent if I didn't comply. Tucked inside the legal papers was a handwritten note from Sophie, my daughter-in-law. "Margaret, please come back. Daniel is out of control. The creditors are calling. We need you." I read the note 3 times. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with anger. Marissa handled the legal side swiftly, sending back a statement that included my medical records, proof of financial stability, and detailed documentation of the loans Daniel had taken from me over the years. When she hung up the phone, she looked at me calmly. "They don't have a case, but he's not going to stop." I nodded slowly. "Then neither will I." That night, as the waves whispered outside the window, I sat on the balcony again, staring at the endless horizon. Somewhere between the ocean and the stars, I felt the quiet pulse of a truth I'd ignored for too long. Daniel wasn't just Edward's son by blood. He was his father's echo, sharpened by privilege, spoiled by my love, and blinded by entitlement. But that chain, the one that bound mother to son, victim to manipulator, had finally broken. And this time, I wasn't the one left in pieces. The morning the police knocked on my door, I thought my heart might stop. It was early, too early for visitors. The sound was sharp, insistent, echoing through the small apartment like thunder rolling over calm water. For a brief, terrifying second, I thought it was Daniel. I could almost hear his angry voice. Imagine the way his hand would slam against the door, his eyes filled with that cold, commanding fury. When I looked through the peephole, my knees nearly gave out from relief. It wasn't Daniel, it was a woman in plain clothes holding up a badge. "Mrs. Margaret Evans?" she asked when I opened the door, keeping the security chain on. "Yes, that's me. Detective Olivia Price, Miami Police Department," she said gently. "May I come in? We need to talk about your son." Those last 2 words made my stomach twist. I let her in. The morning sunlight poured through the windows, making the room look warmer than I felt. I offered her coffee, more out of habit than hospitality. She accepted with a polite smile, setting her small notepad on the table. "Mrs. Evans," she began carefully, "your son Daniel is being investigated for financial fraud, forgery, and possible ties to private lenders, some of whom have criminal backgrounds." Her words landed like stones. I'd always suspected Daniel's business dealings weren't entirely clean, but hearing it from a detective made it real. I had no idea," I stammered. "I knew he borrowed money. I knew he was struggling. But this?" Detective Price nodded. "We've reviewed several transactions in your name, Mrs. Evans. Did you ever sign any documents for him?" My throat tightened. Years ago, I admitted. He said it was for emergencies, to protect me, in case I needed help accessing funds. I trusted him. The detective sighed softly. It appears those documents were used to open multiple accounts under your name. Large sums were transferred through them. I felt dizzy. You're saying he stole my identity? She hesitated. Technically, yes. You're a victim in this case, but we'll need your statement. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. My son, the child I'd carried, raised, defended, had used my name not just for money, but for crime. Will he go to prison? I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. That depends on the evidence, she said softly. But given the scope of what we've found, it's very likely. She gave me her card and stood. We'll keep you informed. In the meantime, Mrs. Evans, I recommend you stay cautious. Some of the people your son owes money to aren't safe to be around. When she left, I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty coffee mug she'd left behind. The silence pressed on my chest like a weight. I'd spent 68 years of my life trying to protect my family. Now, the only way to save myself was to let my son fall. Marissa arrived that afternoon, as soon as she heard the news. She looked furious. I told you, she said, pacing across the room. He was going to drag you down with him. I rubbed my temples. He's still my son, Marissa, and that's what he's counting on. She stopped in front of me. You have to let the police handle this. Promise me you won't call him. I haven't, I said truthfully. And I won't. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The waves crashed against the shore outside my window, rhythmic and relentless, like the beating of a guilty heart. Was it my fault? Had I loved him too much or not enough? At some point, I got up, walked to the balcony, and looked out at the endless dark sea. Somewhere out there was the version of me that had never learned to say no. I whispered to her softly, "It's over." 3 days later, I received a voicemail from Sophie. Her voice shook. "Margaret, please call me back. Daniel's been arrested. They took him in yesterday for questioning. I don't know what to do. The kids are scared. Please help us." I replayed the message twice, tears welling in my eyes. Then I deleted it. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival. When I told Marissa, she nodded approvingly. "You did the right thing. Sophie will have to figure this out herself. You can't save everyone." But her words didn't stop the ache in my chest. A week passed before Detective Price called again. "Mrs. Evans, Daniel's been released temporarily pending trial," she said. "But I need to warn you, he's angry. He's blaming you for cooperating with us." My blood ran cold. "Does he know where I live?" "We've taken precautions," she said. "But if anything happens, you call me immediately." That night, I double-checked every lock on my doors and windows. I moved the small lamp from the bedside table to the living room so I could keep the lights on. I even kept a heavy vase near the door, ridiculous as that seemed. I didn't sleep at all. 2 days later, as I was returning from the market, I noticed a car parked near the building. It wasn't familiar. The windows were tinted too darkly for me to see inside. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was being paranoid. But when I came back out an hour later, the car was still there. I called Detective Price. "It's probably nothing," I said, trying to sound calm. She didn't sound convinced. "Stay inside. I'll send a patrol." 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. The suspicious car drove off before they even got out. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. "You shouldn't have crossed family, Mom." My hands shook as I read it. The handwriting was Daniel's. Marissa was at my apartment within the hour. "He's completely lost it," she said after reading the note. "We need to increase your security. I'll handle it." Within a day, cameras were installed around the building. 2 off-duty officers were hired to patrol the area at night. Still, I jumped at every sound, every creak, every passing shadow. I was living in paradise, with the constant fear of hell knocking on my door. A week later, there was another knock. My heart nearly stopped again, but it wasn't Daniel this time either. It was Detective Price, holding a folder. "Mrs. Evans," she said, "we've taken your son into custody again. This time for attempted blackmail and conspiracy." I blinked. "What?" She opened the folder. Inside were transcripts of recorded phone calls. "Daniel tried to hire someone to scare you. We intercepted it. Don't worry, you're safe now." I sank into my chair, hands trembling. "He wanted to hurt me?" "Not necessarily hurt," she said carefully, "but intimidate. To remind you he still has power." I felt tears well up, but they weren't from fear. They were from something deeper. Grief. Grief for the boy who used to bring me flowers. For the little voice that once said, "I love you, Mommy." For the son who no longer existed. After the detective left, I called Marissa. She came over immediately, carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. We sat in silence on the balcony, watching the ocean turn gold under the setting Sunday. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. "Empty," I said. "And guilty." "Don't," she said firmly. "If you hadn't left, you'd be the one in prison or worse." I looked at her, eyes wet with tears. "I keep thinking, if I'd raised him differently." Marissa shook her head. "You can't keep taking the blame for everyone else's choices. Daniel made his bed. Now he's lying in it." Her words settled deep inside me, like stones sinking to the ocean floor. The next morning, the newspaper headline made my hands tremble. "Businessman arrested for fraud and ties to criminal groups." Below the headline was a photograph of Daniel in handcuffs, being led into a police car. For a long time, I just stared at it. That was my son, the same boy whose first word had been mama, the same boy I'd rocked to sleep through fevers and nightmares. And yet, the man in that photo looked nothing like the child I remembered. I folded the paper and set it aside. When the phone rang, I already knew who it was. "Mrs. Evans," Detective Price said, "your son is requesting to see you." "Why?" "He says he won't speak to anyone else." Marissa looked horrified when I told her. "You're not going." "Yes, I am," I said quietly. "I need to see him. I need to end this." The next day, I walked into the cold gray walls of the police station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My palms were sweating as they led me into a small room divided by glass. Then I saw him. Daniel sat on the other side, in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, eyes hollow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He looked older, smaller like the little boy who used to run to me after school. But that illusion vanished as soon as he spoke. "Mom," he said hoarsely, "you came." I nodded, sitting down. "You wanted to see me. I'm here." He leaned forward. "You have to help me. These people, they'll destroy me. I just need some money." "No." He froze. "What?" I met his eyes steadily. "I'm not giving you another cent. Not a penny, not ever again." His face hardened. "You'd let your own son rot in jail?" "I'd let my son face the consequences of his actions." For a second, he said nothing. Then he slammed his handcuffed hands against the glass, making me flinch. "You'll regret this," he hissed. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding, but my voice calm. "No, Daniel," I said quietly. "For the first time in my life, I won't." And I walked away, leaving behind not just my son, but decades of guilt, manipulation, and fear. As I stepped outside, the Miami sun hit my face again, warm, bright, and free. And for the first time in 68 years, I felt like I finally belonged to myself. The morning after I visited Daniel at the police station, I woke up feeling like I'd been scraped raw from the inside. My body moved, but my mind lagged behind, as if part of me was still sitting across that glass wall, staring into my son's cold eyes. I made coffee out of habit, poured it into my favorite mug, and sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean. The waves were calm that morning, rolling gently under a pale pink sky. The kind of day that should have brought peace, but inside me, there was only silence. Daniel was in jail, and I was free. Those two truths clashed inside me like opposite tides. For most of my life, I dreamed of freedom. Freedom from Edward's control, from Daniel's demands, from the guilt that kept me obedient. Now that I finally had it, I didn't quite know what to do with it. Marissa showed up around noon, carrying a bag of pastries. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she asked, studying my face. "Not much," I admitted. He looked different, empty, like he'd been hollowed out. Marissa sighed. "Prison will do that to anyone. But you did what you had to do." "I know." I took a slow sip of coffee. "It doesn't make it easier." She sat beside me, handing me a croissant. "You're grieving, Margaret. Not for who Daniel is, but for who you hoped he'd be." Her words hit hard. I stared out at the water, blinking back tears. "You're right. I think I lost him long before the police ever came." The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. I filled them with small tasks, watering my plants, baking bread, taking walks by the beach. The ocean became my confessional. Every morning, I'd stand by the shoreline, letting the waves wash over my feet, as if they could pull the guilt out of me grain by grain. Sometimes I'd imagine Daniel as a little boy, again running barefoot through our old garden, laughing, holding my hand. Then the image would blur into the man he'd become, and my chest would tighten. I didn't cry much. Not because I didn't want to, but because the tears had all been used up long ago. A week later, Marissa called me from her office. "I got word from the prosecutor. The evidence is strong. Daniel will probably face trial in a few months." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Good," I said softly. Then, almost on cue, the doorbell rang. "I'll call you back," I told her and went to open the door. Standing there was Sophie, pale, thin, eyes red-rimmed. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of the world had pressed her down. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated for a moment but stepped aside. "Of course." She entered slowly, looking around the apartment like someone visiting a sacred place. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Peaceful." "It's mine," I replied simply. We sat on the small sofa. She wrapped her hands around the cup of tea I made for her, though she barely drank it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, heavy with all the things that had never been said. Finally, she looked up. "I came because I didn't know where else to go." I nodded, waiting. "Daniel's not the same," she continued, her voice trembling. "He's angry, blames everyone, especially you. He said you turned him in, that you ruined everything." I stayed quiet. "He's wrong," she added quickly. "He ruined himself. But the creditors those men he borrowed from, they're still out there. They've been calling, showing up at the house. I'm scared, Margaret. For me. For the kids." My heart clenched. "Where are they?" "At my parents' house in Idaho," she said. "Safe for now. But I don't know how long." I reached out and took her hand. "You did the right thing by leaving. You have to protect them. Daniel's choices are his, not yours." Tears filled her eyes. "He used me too, you know. I just didn't see it. Not until it was too late." "I know," I whispered. "I lived that story too." She looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "For 30 years, I let Edward, my husband, Daniel's father, control every part of my life. My money, my choices, my voice. When he died, I thought I was finally free. But then Daniel stepped right into his father's shadow, and I let him." Her face softened. You didn't let him. You loved him. Love doesn't mean obedience, I said gently. I wish I'd learned that sooner. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the ocean outside. Then she said, The kids miss you. Ethan keeps asking when he can see Grandma again. I smiled through the ache. Soon. When things settle, I'll visit. Or maybe you can all come here. The beach would do them good. Her eyes brightened for the first time. They'd love that. She stayed the night on my couch. When she fell asleep, I stood by the window, watching the moonlight shimmer over the waves. For the first time since I'd left my old life behind, I didn't feel alone. In the weeks that followed, Sophie and I spoke often. She decided to sell the beach apartment Daniel had bought years ago to pay off part of the debt. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Meanwhile, I began to rebuild my own life piece by piece. I joined a small community market and started selling the embroidered tablecloths and scarves I used to make for Edward's business parties. To my surprise, they sold well. People loved the intricate patterns and old-fashioned craftsmanship. One woman at the market, a retired teacher named Claire, asked if I'd teach her how to embroider. Then another joined, and soon I had a small class of 3 women, all around my age, meeting twice a week in my living room. We laughed, shared stories, and drank too much tea. It wasn't just about stitching fabric, it was about mending something deeper inside ourselves. For the first time in decades, I was surrounded by women who weren't judging me or needing something from me. We were just there, together, healing. Then one morning, Marissa called with news. The trial's been scheduled, she said. They'll need your testimony. I went key it. Margaret, she said gently, you don't have to do this if you're not ready. I am, I replied. He needs to hear the truth. And so do I. The courthouse was colder than I expected. The air smelled of polished wood and nerves. I sat next to Marissa in the front row as the judge called the case. The state of Florida versus Daniel Evans. When they brought Daniel in, my breath caught. He looked thinner, older, his hair unkempt. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between anger and pleading. When they called me to the stand, my hands trembled as I took the oath. The prosecutor's questions were simple, at first factual, straightforward. Mrs. Evans, can you describe your financial relationship with your son? I loaned him money, I said. Repeatedly, over many years. Sometimes because he asked politely. Sometimes because he demanded. And did he ever repay you? No. The prosecutor nodded. Can you describe the incident that led you to leave your home? I swallowed hard. He came to my house demanding $300,000 to pay off his wife's debt. When I hesitated, he told me not to disappoint him. My voice cracked slightly on the last words. In that moment, I continued, I realized he didn't see me as a mother anymore, just a resource, something to drain. So I left. The courtroom was silent. Even Daniel looked down. His lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, as a fragile old woman manipulated by others. But when he asked, Do you consider yourself a good mother, Mrs. Evans? I took a deep breath and answered honestly. I thought being a good mother meant giving everything, time, money, love. But now I understand it means knowing when to stop giving, when to let your children face their consequences, when to protect your own soul. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge gave a small nod. When I stepped down from the stand, my knees were weak. Marissa reached out, squeezing my hand. You were incredible, she whispered. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty on all counts. Daniel was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 4. When the guards led him away, he turned once, eyes meeting mine. This isn't over, he said quietly, but his voice no longer scared me. As I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Florida sunlight, Marissa asked, How do you feel? I looked up at the sky, breathing in deeply. Free, I said simply. Truly free. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. 6 months had passed since the trial. Winter came to Miami, though winter here was a kind of gentle illusion. Cool breezes, restless waves, and palm trees swaying instead of bare branches shivering in the cold. My apartment had started to feel like home, really mine. Not just a place to hide, but a place to belong. I filled it with small things that made me smile: potted orchids by the balcony, a basket of yarn and embroidery threads, seashells my grandchildren had sent me from their new home in Idaho. I'd started teaching embroidery classes twice a week at a local community center. What began as a small group of 3 women had grown to more than 10. We weren't just stitching fabric. We were stitching ourselves back together, women who had been silenced, controlled, or dismissed for too long. I never told them all the details of my story, but sometimes, when I saw the flicker of pain in someone's eyes, I knew. We didn't need words. Every Sunday, I'd have a video call with Sophie and the kids. Ethan, now 8, had grown taller, and little Marianne, 6, had lost her first tooth and couldn't stop showing me the gap in her smile. "Grandma, guess what?" Ethan shouted once. "Mom said we can visit you this summer." My heart lifted. "You'd better bring your swimsuits," I said. "We'll build sandcastles bigger than the Empire State Building." Marianne giggled. "Can we find shells too?" "All the shells you want," I promised. When the call ended, I sat for a long while just smiling at the screen, my heart full and aching at once. One morning, as I was setting up my embroidery stand at the community fair, Marissa called. "I have news," she said in her brisk lawyer's tone. "Daniel's lawyers have filed for a sentence review. They're trying to reduce his time based on good behavior." I felt the familiar chill in my stomach, but it didn't crush me this time. "Is there any chance they'll succeed?" "Maybe. But don't worry. He's still in a high-security facility. And even if the sentence is reduced, he won't get out for years." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Thank you, Marissa, for everything." And she paused, her voice softening. "You've changed, Margaret. A year ago, you'd be in tears over this. Now you sound strong." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." That night, after dinner, I checked the mail slot outside my apartment and froze. There was a letter. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting instantly. "Daniel." For a moment, I considered throwing it away. But curiosity, no, something deeper, made me bring it inside. I sat on the couch, staring at the envelope until my tea went cold. Finally, I opened it. "Mom, I don't know if you'll even read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not for getting caught. Not even for going to prison. I'm sorry for the things I said to you. For treating you like a wallet instead of a person. I've been in therapy here. They make us write letters to the people we hurt the most. I didn't realize until now how much I sound like Dad. How much I became him. You were right to leave. You saved yourself. Maybe, one day, you even saved me. Daniel." My vision blurred. The words swam on the page, heavy and uncertain. Was it real? Was it another manipulation? I didn't know, but it didn't feel like the old Daniel. There was no demand, no guilt, no trick, just reflection. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. For the first time, I didn't feel rage, just a strange kind of sadness, like watching a storm fade into drizzle. Marissa came over the next day. "You kept it?" she asked, noticing the letter. "Yes. Do you believe him?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But maybe it doesn't matter. He's the one who has to live with his choices now. Not me." Marissa smiled gently. "That's progress." We shared a glass of wine on the balcony, the ocean shimmering silver under the moonlight. The months that followed were peaceful. I found myself laughing more often, even over small things, burned cookies, tangled threads, the way the neighbor's cat always stole my sun chair. I'd started taking swimming lessons for seniors at the community pool, though at first, I was terrified of the water. The instructor, a patient woman named Angela, told me something that stuck. You can't learn to swim until you stop fighting the water. Maybe that was true for life, too. I had spent decades fighting against men, guilt, fear, and loneliness. Now, I was learning to float. By early summer, Sophie and the kids arrived. The moment they stepped off the taxi, Ethan ran straight into my arms. "Grandma!" Marianne followed, clutching a small stuffed dolphin. "Mom said we can sleep in your room." Their laughter filled the apartment like sunlight pouring through every window. Sophie hugged me tightly. "It feels like forever," she whispered. "I'm so glad you came," I said, holding back tears. We spent the days at the beach collecting shells, building sandcastles, eating ice cream that melted too fast in the Miami heat. At night, we cooked together, the kids giggling as they tried to flip pancakes. For the first time, I saw Sophie smile without strain. She had color in her cheeks again, her eyes softer, freer. One evening, after the kids fell asleep, she and I sat on the balcony watching the waves. "I got a letter from Daniel, too," she said quietly. I turned to her, surprised. "And?" He said he's been working in the prison garden. That planting things helps him feel human again. I thought about that for a while. "Maybe it does," she hesitated. "Do you think people like him can really change?" I sighed, looking at the horizon where the sky met the sea. "I don't know, but I think people can try. And sometimes trying is the beginning of change." Sophie nodded. "Ethan still asks about his dad. I tell him Daddy's learning to be a better person." "That's a good answer," I said softly. "Maybe one day it'll even be true." After they left, the apartment felt quiet again, but not empty. Their laughter still echoed faintly in the rooms, like the afterglow of something warm and real. A few weeks later, another letter came, shorter this time. "Mom, they're transferring me to a work program next month, planting trees along the coast. It's hard work, but I like it. The soil doesn't judge you, it just waits to see what you'll grow. Thank you for not giving up on me completely. Daniel." This time, I smiled. I didn't reply, but I placed the letter in a box with the first one. Not forgiveness yet, but acknowledgement. Life settled into rhythm again. My embroidery classes expanded. Marissa and I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping victims of financial and emotional abuse. Every time I sat with those women, some younger than my son, some older than me, I saw pieces of my own story reflected in their eyes. The shame, the confusion, the lingering hope. I told them what I'd learned. Not as advice, but as truth. It's never too late to take your life back. Never too late to stop being afraid. They listened, and some cried, and some smiled. And each time I shared those words, I felt something inside me heal a little more. One evening, as I walked along the shore at sunset, the sky streaked in shades of coral and gold, I realized how different everything looked now. The sea no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a companion, vast, unpredictable, but alive. I stopped to pick up a small shell, smooth and pale pink. It reminded me of the one Marianne had given me that summer. I whispered to the wind, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to life itself, for the pain that broke me, for the strength that rebuilt me, for the peace I'd finally earned. At 69 years old, I had no husband, no wealth, no illusions left. But I had something better. Myself. It was late autumn when I saw him again. The air carried the kind of softness that comes just before winter, the light a little weaker, the breeze cool but kind. I was walking along the beach with a basket of shells for my embroidery students when a group of men in tan uniforms caught my eye. They were clearing debris from the dunes, supervised by 2 correctional officers. At first, I didn't pay attention. Prison labor programs were common around here. Groups of inmates brought to clean the beaches, plant trees, repair fences. But as I walked closer, something in me shifted, a familiar posture, a slant of the shoulders. Then he turned. Daniel, the world seemed to stop. For a long moment, neither of us moved. His face was leaner, sunburned, older. There were deep lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He froze, the rake slipping from his hand, his expression flickering between disbelief and something I couldn't name. "Mom?" he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. I felt my breath catch in my throat. "Daniel," the guard noticed the tension immediately, stepping forward. "Sir, back to work. It's okay," I said quickly, raising a hand. "I'm his mother." The guard hesitated, studying me. Then he nodded slightly. 5 minutes. Stay close. Daniel approached slowly, as if afraid I might vanish if he moved too fast. When he finally stood in front of me, I could see the small tremor in his hands. "I didn't know you lived around here," he said quietly. "I didn't either," I replied, "until I saw you." We stood in silence for a while. The wind picked up, rustling the palm fronds behind us. "You look different," he said. "Healthier." "I am," I answered. "I've been taking care of myself." He nodded, eyes lowering. "Good. You deserve that." For a moment, I thought that was all we'd say. Then his voice broke slightly. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again. I didn't expect to," I admitted. "But maybe life has its own plans." He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I guess it does." He told me he was part of a coastal rehabilitation program, planting trees and cleaning beaches as part of his sentence reduction. "It's hard work," he said, glancing toward the other inmates. "But I like it. It keeps my head clear." I looked at his hands, calloused, cracked, stained with dirt. They looked more human than I'd ever seen them. "I'm glad," I said softly. He hesitated. "Did you get my letters?" "I did." He swallowed hard. "Did you believe them?" I paused. "I wanted to. And maybe I do. Now." That seemed to ease something in him. His shoulders dropped. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and seaweed between us. "Mom," he said finally, "I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I mean it. Every word. You were right about everything about Dad, about me, about the way I lived. I thought control was love. I thought money was respect. Turns out, I didn't know either." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't look away. "We both made mistakes, Daniel. I stayed silent too long. I should have shown you what real love looked like without fear, without debt. Maybe then you wouldn't have learned his ways." He shook his head. "You did your best. I know that now." We stood there, the waves crashing gently against the shore, the years between us rising and falling with each breath. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. The question hit me like a gust of wind. "No," I said quietly. "I don't hate you. I hate what you became, but I also see the boy you were the one who brought me seashells and called me his hero. I still love that boy." He looked down, blinking hard. "I lost him somewhere along the way." "Then find him again," I whispered. "It's not too late." The guard called out. "Time's up." Daniel nodded, stepping back. "Will I see you again?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe. But whether you do or not, I'll be hoping you keep walking toward the light." He smiled, faint but real. That's all I needed to hear. As he walked away, raking sand alongside the others, I watched him go until he disappeared into the line of men moving down the shore. For the first time, I didn't feel grief. I felt peace. That evening, I told Marissa what had happened. She listened quietly, sipping her wine. "Well," she said after a long silence, "life really does come full circle, doesn't it?" I nodded. "I didn't plan it. I just showed up at the right place at the right time. Or maybe," she said softly, "you showed up at the right place for both of you." Her words lingered long after she left. Over the next few months, I continued seeing the work crews along the beach, though I never approached again. Sometimes I'd spot Daniel in the distance, head bent, planting young trees in neat rows along the dunes. Once, he looked up and saw me standing far away near the boardwalk. He didn't wave, neither did I, but we both smiled. That was enough. Spring came again, bright and fragrant. My embroidery classes grew larger, and my little community of women turned into something more, a sisterhood of sorts. We started donating handmade blankets to local shelters and hospitals. Each piece had a stitched message along the edge: "You are not alone." One afternoon, during a class, a woman named Linda, newly divorced after 30 years of marriage, asked me, "How do you stop being angry, Margaret? How do you stop hating the person who hurt you?" I thought about Daniel, about Edward, about the long road it had taken to stand where I was now. "You don't stop feeling angry," I said gently. "You just stop feeding it. One day you wake up and realize you don't want to carry their weight anymore. So you put it down, and then you keep walking." "Oh," Linda smiled through tears. "That sounds peaceful." "It is," I said, "and it's worth the wait." A few weeks later, I received a postcard. No return address, just a photo of a small pine sapling growing in the sand. On the back, in familiar handwriting, were 6 simple words: "Still planting, still learning, still trying." I traced the words with my fingers, smiling. Then I placed the postcard beside the 2 letters in the box on my nightstand. It felt like closure, not the kind that slams doors shut, but the kind that leaves them gently ajar, letting light seep through. On my 69th birthday, Sophie and the kids came to visit again. Ethan brought me a handmade card that read, "Happy birthday, Grandma. You're the strongest person I know." I laughed, hugging him tight. "You're going to make me cry, young man." Marianne gave me a small pot with a tiny green sprout. "It's a tree," she said proudly. "We planted it for you." Sophie smiled. "It's from all of us." As I placed the pot on the balcony, the sea breeze brushed against my face, warm and gentle. I looked at the fragile little plant and thought of Daniel's words: "Still planting, still learning, still trying." Maybe that's all any of us could do. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stepped outside. The moon was full, casting silver paths over the water. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the rhythm of the ocean match the rhythm of my heart. For years, my life had been about survival, quiet endurance in the face of pain. But now, it was about something else entirely: healing, growing, becoming. I whispered softly into the wind, "I forgive you, Daniel. I forgive you, Edward. And most of all, I forgive myself." The wind seemed to answer, carrying the scent of salt and jasmine across the balcony. And for the first time, I didn't just feel free. I felt whole. If you've made it this far, maybe you've seen a little of yourself in my story. Maybe you've spent years giving everything you had, your time, your money, your heart, until there was nothing left but exhaustion and silence. I used to believe that love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife, a good mother, meant giving without limits, forgiving without pause, and staying no matter how much it hurt. But the truth is, love without respect isn't love. It's a slow disappearance. It took me 68 years to understand that freedom doesn't always come from running away. It comes from finally standing still and saying, "Enough." I lost almost everything before I found myself again. My husband's approval, my son's trust, my old life, all of it gone. But in their place, I discovered something much stronger: peace. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about releasing its hold on you. When I forgave Daniel, I wasn't excusing what he'd done. I was freeing myself from the prison I'd built around my own heart. To every woman listening to this, you are not too old, you are not too late, and you are not defined by what someone else took from you. You are allowed to start over, to rebuild, to laugh again, to choose yourself. Even if your hands tremble and your heart aches, choose yourself anyway. Life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes it breaks us to show us how strong we can be. Sometimes it takes everything away to remind us that peace was never in the things we lost. It was always inside us, waiting to be found. When I walk along the shore now, I look at the small trees growing where Daniel once planted them, and I think about how life keeps growing even in broken soil. Maybe that's what healing really is: not forgetting, but blooming anyway. So, if my story touched your heart, I ask you to stay with me. Let's keep walking this journey together, toward healing, toward strength, toward hope. Because somewhere out there, beyond the pain and the waves and the years we thought we wasted, there's a new sunrise waiting for all of us. And it's never, ever too late to meet it.